Behind the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, where million-dollar smiles hide thousand-dollar secrets, a storm was brewing that would shake the very foundations of the British royal family. What started as whispered conversations in palace corridors would soon explode into a confrontation so shocking that even the most experienced royal staff stood frozen in disbelief. This isn't just another story about royal protocol or ceremonial duties. This is the untold truth about what really happens when cameras stop rolling, when the public goes home, and when the weight of centuries-old traditions collides with very human emotions. It's about jealousy that festered in silence, loyalty tested to its breaking point, and a moment that changed everything. You think you know the royal family? Think again. What you're about to discover will make you question everything you believed about the people behind the crowns, and show you that even in the most privileged family on earth, some battles are fought with words sharper than any sword. The truth always finds a way to surface, and when it does, not even palace walls can contain shockwaves. The morning sun cast long shadows across the perfectly manicured gardens of Kensington Palace as Catherine, Princess of Wales, reviewed the day's schedule with her private secretary. The autumn air carried a crispness that matched the precision of her daily routine, but today felt different somehow. There was an electricity in the air that she couldn't quite place, a tension that seemed to follow her through the ornate hallways like an unwelcome shadow. Catherine had always prided herself on her ability to read people and situations. It was a skill that had served her well during her transition from a middle-class upbringing to life at the very heart of the British monarchy. But lately, she found herself struggling to decode the subtle shifts in palace dynamics, particularly when it came to her relationship with Queen Camilla. The changes had been gradual at first, so subtle that Catherine wondered if she was imagining them. A shortened conversation here, a redirected glance there, staff members who seemed suddenly uncomfortable when both women were in the same room. It was like watching a slow-motion earthquake, where the ground shifts so gradually that you don't notice until the cracks become impossible to ignore. 3 months earlier, Catherine had been riding high on a wave of public approval following her successful completion of a major charitable initiative focused on early childhood development. The project had taken 2 years of careful planning and execution, involving partnerships with universities, government agencies, and dozens of charitable organizations. The media had praised her dedication, intelligence, and genuine commitment to making a difference. Palace insiders had whispered that this was exactly the kind of substantive work the monarchy needed in the modern era. But success, Catherine was learning, could be a double-edged sword within the royal family. While the public celebrated her achievements, she began to notice a cooling in certain quarters of the palace. Queen Camilla, who had initially been supportive of Catherine's work, seemed to grow more distant with each positive headline. The congratulatory messages became shorter, the invitations to private functions less frequent, and the warmth in their interactions noticeably diminished. Catherine found herself walking on eggshells, carefully measuring her words and actions to avoid any perception of overstepping boundaries. She understood the delicate balance required in royal life, where hierarchy was everything and even the smallest gesture could be interpreted as a challenge to established order. But understanding it intellectually was different from navigating it emotionally, especially when it felt like the rules kept changing without notice. The situation became more complex when William began to notice the shift as well. As the heir apparent, he occupied a unique position within the family dynamic, caught between his loyalty to his wife and his respect for his stepmother. He had watched Catherine struggle with increasing isolation within certain palace circles, and it troubled him more than he cared to admit. William had always believed that the strength of the monarchy lay in its ability to present a united front, but unity was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain when personal relationships were fracturing behind closed doors. The breaking point came during what should have been a routine planning meeting for the upcoming Christmas celebrations at Sandringham. Catherine had been asked to coordinate with Queen Camilla on the arrangement of family photographs, a seemingly simple task that had been handled smoothly in previous years. The meeting was scheduled for a quiet Tuesday afternoon in Queen Camilla's private office at Clarence House, a space that reflected her personal taste with its warm colors and carefully curated collection of art and books. Catherine arrived promptly at the appointed time, her notebook filled with preliminary ideas and suggestions. She had spent considerable time preparing, wanting to ensure that every detail would meet with approval. The Christmas photographs were an important tradition, serving not only as personal mementos for the family, but also as carefully orchestrated public relations tools that reinforced the image of royal harmony and continuity. Queen Camilla was seated behind her antique desk when Catherine entered, her expression unreadable as she gestured for the younger woman to take a seat. The usual pleasantries were exchanged, but Catherine immediately sensed an underlying tension in the air. It was as if they were two actresses playing roles they knew by heart, but the script had suddenly changed without either of them being told. As Catherine began to present her ideas for the photo arrangements, she noticed that Queen Camilla's attention seemed to wander. The older woman's responses became increasingly clipped, and her body language suggested impatience rather than engagement. When Catherine suggested a particular grouping that would highlight the 3 generations of the royal family, Queen Camilla's reaction was swift and decisive. "I think you're overcomplicating things," Queen Camilla said, her voice carrying an edge that Catherine had never heard before. "These arrangements have worked perfectly well for years without requiring such elaborate planning." The words themselves were not particularly harsh, but the tone carried an unmistakable message. Catherine was overstepping her bounds. Catherine felt her cheeks flush as she absorbed the criticism. She had been careful to frame her suggestions as ideas rather than decisions, precisely to avoid any appearance of presumption. But somehow, her efforts to be helpful had been interpreted as attempts to take control. She could feel the delicate balance of their relationship shifting beneath her feet, like sand slipping through her fingers. "Of course, Your Majesty," Catherine replied carefully, her training in diplomatic language serving her well even as her emotions churned. "I was simply hoping to contribute to what has always been such a beautiful tradition." She paused, gathering her courage before continuing. "Perhaps we could discuss what approaches have worked best in the past, so I can better understand your preferences." The offer was made in good faith, an attempt to bridge the growing gap between them. But Queen Camilla's response suggested that the gap might already be too wide to cross. "I think it would be best if you focused on your own responsibilities," she said, her words delivered with surgical precision. "There are plenty of areas where your attention would be more appropriate." The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine felt as though she had been physically struck, the carefully maintained facade of royal courtesy cracking to reveal something much more personal and painful underneath. This wasn't about Christmas photographs or protocol or even hierarchy. This was about power, territory, and the fear that Catherine's rising popularity might somehow diminish Queen Camilla's own position within the family. Catherine gathered her materials with as much dignity as she could muster, her hands steady despite the turmoil inside her. "I understand, Your Majesty," she said quietly. "I'll redirect my focus accordingly." The words were chosen carefully, acknowledging the message without accepting its underlying premise. She would not apologize for her success or her commitment to her royal duties, even if that commitment had somehow been perceived as a threat. As Catherine left Clarence House that afternoon, she felt the weight of a fundamental shift in her royal life. The honeymoon period of her marriage into the royal family was officially over, replaced by something much more complex and potentially dangerous. She understood now that her position was more precarious than she had realized, and that success could be as much a liability as an asset in the intricate game of palace politics. The drive back to Kensington Palace gave her time to process what had happened and consider her options. She could retreat, pulling back from her public duties and allowing others to take the lead. She could confront the situation directly, risking an escalation that could damage not just her own position, but potentially the entire royal family. or she could find a middle path, one that honored both her own integrity and the complex relationships that defined her world. By the time she arrived home, Catherine had made her decision. She would not retreat from her responsibilities or apologize for her success, but she would be more careful about how she navigated the treacherous waters of royal politics. She would also need to have a serious conversation with William about what was happening and what it might mean for their future. That evening, as she watched her children play in the garden, Catherine reflected on the strange irony of her situation. She had spent years preparing for a life of public service, dedicating herself to causes she believed in and working tirelessly to justify the public's faith in the monarchy. But success, it seemed, came with its own set of challenges, particularly when that success was perceived as a threat by those who had worked equally hard to establish their own positions. The confrontation with Queen Camilla had revealed fault lines of the royal family that Catherine had hoped didn't exist. But now that they were exposed, she would need to decide how to respond. The easy path would be to step back, to make herself smaller and less threatening. But Catherine had never chosen the easy path, and she wasn't about to start now. As the sun set over London, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Catherine made a silent promise to herself. She would continue to serve with dignity and dedication, regardless of the personal cost. But she would also protect herself and her family from those who sought to undermine them. The game of palace politics was about to become much more interesting, and Catherine intended to play it on her own terms. The next few weeks would test every lesson she had learned about royal life, every skill she had developed in reading people and situations. But most importantly, they would test her marriage to William and his willingness to stand by her when the stakes were highest. The real confrontation was yet to come, but the battle lines were now clearly drawn. The weeks following the tense meeting at Clarence House felt like walking through a minefield blindfolded. Catherine threw herself into her royal duties with renewed determination, but every engagement now carried an undercurrent of uncertainty. She found herself second-guessing decisions that would have been automatic just months before, wondering how each action might be interpreted by those who seemed determined to find fault with her every move. William noticed a change in his wife immediately. The confident woman who had gracefully navigated everything from state dinners to children's hospital visits now seemed perpetually on edge, her usual warmth tempered by a wariness that broke his heart to witness. When he pressed her about what was troubling her, Catherine initially tried to downplay the situation, unwilling to create additional conflict within the family. But William knew his wife too well to be fooled by diplomatic deflection. The conversation finally came during a rare, quiet evening at home, after the children had been put to bed and the palace staff had retreated to their quarters. William found Catherine in their private sitting room, staring out at the darkened gardens with an expression he had come to recognize as deeply troubled. When he sat beside her and took her hand, she didn't pull away, but he could feel the tension in her fingers. "Tell me what's really happening," he said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of a future king, but also the tenderness of a concerned husband. "And please don't say everything is fine, because we both know that's not true." Catherine was quiet for a long moment, weighing her words carefully. She had spent her entire adult life learning to navigate the complex relationships within the royal family, and she understood better than most how easily private conflicts could explode into public scandals. But she also understood that her marriage depended on honesty, even when that honesty might create problems she wasn't sure how to solve. "Your stepmother and I seem to have reached an impasse," she said finally, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of the admission. "I'm not entirely sure what I've done wrong, but it's clear that my presence and my work are being seen as problematic in certain quarters." William felt his jaw tighten as Catherine recounted the incident at Clarence House, along with the dozens of smaller slights and cooling relationships she had noticed in recent months. As the heir to the throne, he had been trained from childhood to think strategically about family dynamics and their impact on the monarchy's stability. But as a husband, his instincts were much more straightforward. Someone was hurting his wife, and that was unacceptable. "This has to stop," he said, his voice carrying a hardness that Catherine rarely heard. "You've done nothing wrong. If anything, you've exceeded every expectation placed on you. The public loves you. Your charitable work is making a real difference, and you've brought a freshness to the royal family that we desperately needed." Catherine appreciated his support, but she also understood the complexity of their situation in ways that William, despite his training, sometimes struggled to grasp. "It's not that simple," she said gently. "Your stepmother has her own insecurities and pressures. She waited decades to become queen, and now she's watching someone younger and more popular receive the kind of attention she's always wanted. That's not your fault," William replied firmly. "And it's not your responsibility to make yourself smaller so that others feel better about themselves." The conversation continued late into the night, with William growing increasingly determined to address the situation directly. Catherine tried to dissuade him, worried that his intervention might escalate things beyond repair, but his mind was made up. The next morning brought news that would change everything. Catherine's private secretary informed her that she had received an invitation to speak at an international conference on childhood development, a prestigious event that would put her work on a global stage. The invitation was exactly the kind of opportunity that Catherine had been working toward for years, a chance to make a real impact on issues she cared deeply about. But the timing couldn't have been worse. The conference was scheduled for the same week as Queen Camilla's own major charitable event, a fundraising gala that had been planned for months. While there was no direct conflict between the two events, the optics were problematic. Media coverage would inevitably compare the two women's activities, and Catherine's international platform would likely overshadow Queen Camilla's more traditional fundraising approach. Catherine's first instinct was to decline the invitation, despite the disappointment it would cause. She had no desire to create additional tension or provide ammunition for those who claimed she was trying to upstage other members of the royal family. But when she discussed the situation with William, his reaction was explosive. "Absolutely not," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You're not going to turn down career-defining opportunities to appease people who are determined to be threatened by your success. This stops now." The argument that followed was one of the most intense of their marriage. Catherine argued for diplomacy and patience, while William pushed for a more direct approach. They both understood that their disagreement was about more than just a conference invitation. It was about fundamental questions of dignity, respect, and how they would navigate the treacherous waters of royal politics together. The situation reached a breaking point 3 days later during a family gathering at Windsor Castle. The occasion was meant to be informal, a chance for the extended royal family to catch up without the pressures of official engagements. But the atmosphere was tense from the moment Catherine and William arrived, with conversation stopping abruptly whenever they entered a room and meaningful glances being exchanged between other family members. Queen Camilla's behavior toward Catherine was pointedly cold, a dramatic change from the warmth that had characterized their early relationship. She managed to avoid direct conversation with Catherine throughout most of the evening, instead focusing her attention on other family members in a way that felt deliberately exclusionary. The breaking point came during dinner, when the conversation turned to upcoming royal engagements. Queen Camilla made several pointed comments about the importance of family members staying in their lanes and not overreaching their designated roles. While she never mentioned Catherine by name, everyone at the table understood who the comments were directed toward. William watched his wife's face grow increasingly tense as the evening progressed, her usual grace under pressure tested to its limits. When Queen Camilla made a particularly cutting remark about certain people who seemed to prioritize personal ambition over family harmony, William's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. "If you have something to say, perhaps you should say it directly," William said, his voice cutting through the dinner conversation like a blade. The table fell silent, with even the most seasoned royal family members stunned by his direct confrontation of Queen Camilla. Queen Camilla's response was swift and brutal. Years of accumulated resentment and frustration poured out in a torrent of criticism aimed directly at Catherine. She accused the younger woman of manipulating media coverage to make herself look good at the expense of other family members. She claimed that Catherine's charitable work was more about building her own brand than serving the public good. Most damaging of all, she suggested that Catherine's popularity was threatening the stability of the monarchy by creating unrealistic expectations for other royals. "Your wife seems to think she can rewrite the rules to suit herself," Queen Camilla said, her voice shaking with emotion. "But this institution has survived for centuries because people understood their place and respected the hierarchy. Some of us have earned our positions through decades of service, not just by marrying into them." The personal attack was devastating in its precision, targeting every insecurity Catherine had ever felt about her background and her right to occupy such an elevated position. But it was also a tactical mistake because it revealed the true nature of Queen Camilla's feelings and made William's response both necessary and justified. William's reaction was swift and decisive. He stood up from his chair, his 6'3" frame imposing as he looked down at his stepmother. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who would one day rule the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth realms. "You will not speak about my wife that way," he said, each word carefully articulated and heavy with meaning. "Catherine has brought nothing but honor to this family, and she has earned her position through years of dedicated service. If you cannot treat her with the respect she deserves, then perhaps we need to reconsider how we interact as a family." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. As the future king, William had considerable influence over how family relationships would evolve in the coming years. He was making it clear that continued attacks on Catherine would have consequences that extended far beyond personal hurt feelings. Queen Camilla seemed to realize she had overplayed her hand. The color drained from her face as she absorbed the full implications of William's words. She had expected him to remain neutral, to find some diplomatic middle ground that would allow everyone to save face. But instead, he had chosen sides decisively and publicly. The dinner concluded in uncomfortable silence, with family members uncertain how to process what they had witnessed. Some were sympathetic to Catherine, recognizing that she had been unfairly targeted. Others worried about the long-term implications of such a public confrontation between the future king and the current queen. As Catherine and William prepared to leave Windsor Castle that evening, she felt a complex mix of emotions. She was grateful for her husband's unwavering support, but also deeply concerned about the potential fallout from the evening's events. The conflict was now out in the open, which meant there was no going back to the careful diplomacy of previous months. The drive back to London was quiet, both of them processing what had happened and what it might mean for their future. William reached over to take Catherine's hand, squeezing it gently as they passed through the darkened countryside. "I'm sorry you had to endure that," he said quietly. "But I'm not sorry I said what I said. It was long overdue." Catherine nodded, understanding that they had crossed a line tonight that couldn't be uncrossed. The royal family's carefully maintained facade of unity had been shattered, at least within their immediate circle. The question now was whether the damage could be contained or whether it would spread beyond the family to affect the monarchy itself. As they approached London, Catherine found herself thinking about the international conference invitation that had started this latest chain of events. She had been leaning toward declining it to keep the peace, but tonight had changed her perspective. If she was going to be criticized regardless of what she did, she might as well be criticized for pursuing her goals rather than abandoning them. The real battle was just beginning, and both sides now understood that the stakes were higher than anyone had initially realized. This wasn't just about personal relationships or family dynamics. It was about the future direction of the monarchy and who would have the power to shape it. The morning after the Windsor Castle confrontation brought an unexpected development that would forever change the dynamics within the royal family. Catherine woke to find her private secretary waiting with urgent news. A recording of the previous evening's dinner conversation had somehow found its way to a prominent British journalist known for his royal family exposés. The leak sent shockwaves through palace communications teams across London. Within hours, secure phone lines were buzzing with crisis management discussions as senior advisors tried to determine the source of the breach and develop strategies for damage control. The recording was incomplete and somewhat muffled, but it captured enough of the exchange to make headlines around the world. Catherine felt sick as she listened to excerpts being played on morning news programs. Her private pain was now public entertainment, and every word of Queen Camilla's criticism was being dissected by royal commentators and social media users alike. The British tabloids were having a field day, with headlines ranging from royal catfight to palace at war splashed across front pages from London to Sydney. William's immediate response was to call an emergency meeting with King Charles, demanding answers about how such a serious security breach could have occurred. The king, who had been hoping the family conflict would resolve itself quietly, was now faced with a full-blown public relations crisis that threatened to overshadow his still new reign. The meeting took place at Buckingham Palace in the king's private study, a room that had witnessed countless moments of royal history, but rarely anything quite this explosive. King Charles sat behind his desk, looking older than his years as he absorbed the full implications of what had happened. William stood near the window, his anger barely contained as he outlined the situation. "This cannot stand," William said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "My wife has been publicly humiliated based on a private family conversation. Someone in this family or on their staff has violated the most basic principles of trust and confidentiality." King Charles rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of a crisis he had hoped to avoid. As a father, he understood William's anger and Catherine's pain. As a monarch, he was acutely aware that family drama played out in public could seriously damage the institution he had spent his life preparing to lead. "The priority now must be damage control," the king said carefully. "We need to present a united front and show the public that this family remains strong despite our differences." But William was not interested in diplomatic solutions. The leak had confirmed his worst fears about the toxic environment his wife was being forced to navigate, and he was determined to address it head-on, regardless of the personal or institutional costs. Meanwhile, at Clarence House, Queen Camilla was dealing with her own crisis. Her communications team was fielding hundreds of calls from journalists seeking comment on the leaked conversation. Social media was overwhelmingly critical of her treatment of Catherine, with hashtags supporting the Princess of Wales trending worldwide. Public opinion polls showed a dramatic shift in favor of Catherine and William, while Queen Camilla's approval ratings plummeted to their lowest levels since her marriage to Charles. The situation deteriorated further when additional details began to emerge about the ongoing tensions between the two women. Royal correspondents, energized by the dramatic story, began reaching out to their palace sources for more information. Within days, a clearer picture emerged of months of subtle conflicts, undermining behaviors, and growing resentment that had finally exploded into open warfare. Catherine found herself in the uncomfortable position of being both victim and focal point of a massive media storm. Every public appearance was now analyzed for signs of stress or conflict, and photographers followed her everywhere, hoping to capture images that would illustrate the ongoing drama. She maintained her composure with remarkable grace, but those close to her could see the toll the situation was taking. The breaking point came during what should have been a routine charity event at a London children's hospital. Catherine had committed to the engagement months earlier, and despite the ongoing crisis, she was determined to fulfill her obligations. The event was meant to highlight the hospital's new pediatric wing, a cause that was particularly close to Catherine's heart. Queen Camilla had also been invited to the event, and palace protocol dictated that both women should attend despite their personal differences. The communications teams worked frantically to choreograph their appearances to minimize the potential for awkward interactions, but the media attention made every moment fraught with tension. Catherine arrived at the hospital first, her composed demeanor giving no hint of the turmoil in her personal life. She moved through the scheduled activities with her usual warmth and professionalism, speaking with young patients and their families, touring the new facilities, and participating in the ceremonial ribbon cutting. Her genuine engagement with the children and medical staff provided a sharp contrast to the palace drama dominating headlines. Queen Camilla arrived 20 minutes later, her own composure carefully maintained, but noticeably more strained. The temperature in the room seemed to drop as she entered, with hospital staff and other attendees acutely aware of the tension between the two royal women. Photographers and videographers captured every interaction, searching for visual evidence of the reported conflict. The confrontation that would dominate news cycles for weeks began during a seemingly innocent group photo session. The hospital's chief executive had requested a formal photograph with both royal visitors to commemorate the opening of the new wing. Protocol suggested that Queen Camilla, as the senior royal, should be positioned in the center, with Catherine to her right. But as the group assembled for the photograph, Queen Camilla made a comment that was captured by sensitive microphones intended to record the formal proceedings. In what she likely believed was a private aside to a nearby aide, she said, "I suppose some people will do anything for attention, even use sick children as props." The comment was devastating in multiple ways. It not only attacked Catherine personally, but also suggested that her charitable work was motivated by self-promotion rather than genuine concern. Most damaging of all, it was made in front of hospital staff and patients' families who had welcomed both women as honored guests. Catherine's reaction was swift and decisive. She turned to face Queen Camilla directly, her composure finally cracking after weeks of accumulated pressure and hurt. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly across the room, ensuring that everyone present could hear her response. "I have spent years working with organizations like this hospital because I believe deeply in the work they do," Catherine said, her voice steady but charged with emotion. "I have never used anyone as a prop, least of all vulnerable children and their families. If you have issues with me, perhaps we should discuss them privately rather than in front of people who deserve our respect and attention." The response was measured but unmistakably firm, a public defense of both her character and her commitment to charitable work. It was also a direct challenge to Queen Camilla's behavior, delivered in a way that made it impossible for the older woman to respond without appearing petty or vindictive. Queen Camilla seemed stunned by Catherine's direct confrontation. She had grown accustomed to delivering cutting remarks without immediate consequences, relying on royal protocol and social hierarchy to protect her from direct challenges. But Catherine had chosen to prioritize her own dignity over diplomatic silence, and the result was a moment of raw honesty that cut through years of accumulated resentment. The hospital staff and other attendees watched in fascination and horror as the two most prominent women in the royal family faced off in their institution. Some tried to pretend they hadn't heard the exchange, while others openly stared as they witnessed a moment that would likely be discussed for decades to come. William, who had been scheduled to arrive later due to other commitments, received urgent calls from his security detail as news of the confrontation spread. He immediately redirected to the hospital, arriving to find a scene of barely controlled chaos as communications teams tried to manage the fallout from what was already being called the most dramatic royal confrontation in recent memory. When William entered the hospital, his first priority was Catherine. He found her in a private room, surrounded by concerned staff members, and looking emotionally drained but determined. The sight of his wife being supported by strangers while dealing with attacks from his own family member triggered a response that surprised even him with its intensity. "Where is she?" he asked quietly, but with an edge that made everyone in the room understand that something significant was about to happen. Queen Camilla was in the hospital's administrative offices, huddled with her own staff as they tried to develop a response to what was rapidly becoming a public relations nightmare. When William appeared in the doorway, his presence filled the room with a tension that was almost tangible. "We need to talk," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Right now, what followed was a conversation that hospital staff later described as intense but controlled, though the specific details remained private. What was clear was that William delivered an ultimatum. The attacks on Catherine would stop immediately, or Queen Camilla would find herself increasingly isolated from the future of the royal family. The message was reinforced by the symbolic gesture that followed. When William and Catherine left the hospital together, they walked hand in hand, presenting a united front that spoke louder than any official statement could have. The image of the future king choosing his wife over his stepmother sent a clear message about where loyalties lay and how the royal hierarchy would evolve under his future reign. The hospital visit, meant to highlight charitable work and royal service, instead became a defining moment in modern royal history. It demonstrated that even within the most traditional institution in British society, there were limits to what behavior would be tolerated, especially when that behavior threatened the very values the monarchy claimed to represent. As news of the confrontation spread around the world, public opinion solidified dramatically in favor of Catherine and William. Social media exploded with support for the Princess of Wales, with many people praising her for finally standing up to what they saw as bullying behavior. International news outlets picked up the story, presenting it as evidence of a generational shift within the British monarchy. The immediate aftermath saw unprecedented changes in royal protocol and family dynamics. Palace communications teams worked around the clock to manage the crisis, while senior royal advisors began developing long-term strategies for preventing similar incidents in the future. Most significantly, it became clear that the old rules governing royal family relationships would need to be reconsidered in light of modern expectations about dignity, respect, and accountability. The hospital confrontation marked a turning point not just for Catherine and Queen Camilla personally, but for the entire institution of the British monarchy. It demonstrated that even the most senior royals could be held accountable for their behavior, and that the future of the institution would be shaped by those willing to stand up for their principles rather than simply maintaining traditional hierarchies. The weeks following the hospital confrontation transformed the British royal family in ways that no one could have predicted. What began as a private family dispute had evolved into a public referendum on the future direction of the monarchy, with millions of people around the world taking sides in a drama that exposed fundamental questions about power, respect, and accountability within one of the world's oldest institutions. King Charles found himself in an impossible position, caught between his wife and his eldest son, with the stability of his reign hanging in the balance. The media coverage was relentless, with royal correspondents providing daily updates on the ongoing crisis and constitutional experts debating the long-term implications for the crown. Public opinion polls showed overwhelming support for Catherine and William, but they also revealed deep concerns about the royal family's ability to maintain unity and dignity under pressure. The king's response was characteristically methodical and strategic. He called for a series of private family meetings designed to address the underlying issues that had led to such a public breakdown. But these meetings quickly revealed that the problems ran deeper than personal animosity between two women. They reflected fundamental disagreements about the role and purpose of the modern monarchy. William used these discussions to articulate a vision for the royal family that prioritized substance over ceremony, public service over personal privilege, and accountability over hierarchy. He made it clear that under his future reign, behavior like Queen Camilla's would not be tolerated, regardless of traditional protocols or family relationships. His position was strengthened by the overwhelming public support he and Catherine had received, but also by his willingness to accept the potential consequences of his stand. Queen Camilla initially attempted to defend her actions, arguing that she had been protecting royal traditions and maintaining proper hierarchy. But as the extent of public disapproval became clear, and as King Charles made his own position known through carefully worded private conversations, she began to realize that her approach had been both personally destructive and institutionally damaging. The turning point came during a meeting between Queen Camilla and Catherine, arranged by King Charles, but conducted without any other family members present. The two women met in the king's private study at Buckingham Palace, a neutral venue that emphasized the seriousness of the occasion, while providing complete privacy for what both understood might be their last opportunity to find common ground. Catherine arrived for the meeting with mixed emotions. Part of her wanted nothing more than to maintain the cold distance that had developed between them, protecting herself from further hurt. But she also understood that her position as a future queen required her to think beyond personal feelings to consider what was best for the institution she would one day help lead. Queen Camilla appeared older and more fragile than Catherine had seen her before. The stress of negative publicity and family conflict had taken a visible toll, and for the first time, Catherine glimpsed the insecurity and fear that had driven her stepmother-in-law's behavior. It didn't excuse the attack she had endured, but it helped her understand the complex emotions behind them. The conversation began awkwardly, with both women struggling to find words that could bridge the enormous gap that had opened between them. Queen Camilla eventually broke the silence with an admission that surprised them both. "I've spent so many years fighting for my place in this family that I forgot how to stop fighting," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "When I saw how easily you found acceptance and love, I felt threatened in ways I hadn't expected." The honesty was unexpected and powerful, revealing vulnerabilities that Queen Camilla had hidden behind years of careful public presentation. Catherine recognized the courage it took to make such an admission, especially to someone who had every reason to reject any overture of peace. Catherine's response was measured but not unkind. "I never wanted to threaten your position," she said. "I've only ever tried to serve this family and the country to the best of my ability. But I cannot and will not accept being diminished or attacked for doing work that I believe in." The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, with both women gradually moving from defensive positions to more honest examinations of their relationship and the pressures they had both faced. Queen Camilla acknowledged the damage her behavior had caused, not just to Catherine personally, but to the royal family's reputation. Catherine, in turn, recognized the legitimate challenges Queen Camilla had faced in establishing her own role within an institution that had initially rejected her. But acknowledgement of past mistakes was only the beginning. The real work lay in determining whether they could find a way forward that protected both their individual dignity and the integrity of the monarchy itself. Catherine made it clear that while she was willing to rebuild their relationship, it would have to be based on mutual respect rather than traditional hierarchy. "I will treat you with the courtesy and respect that your position deserves," Catherine said as their meeting drew to a close. "But I expect the same in return. My charitable work and public duties are not threats to you. They're contributions to the institution we both serve." Queen Camilla's agreement to these terms marked the beginning of a gradual thaw in their relationship, but it also established new parameters for how royal family members would interact with each other going forward. The days when seniority automatically conferred the right to diminish or undermine others were officially over, at least within their immediate circle. King Charles was relieved when both women reported that they had reached an understanding, but he also understood that words would need to be followed by actions. He announced a comprehensive review of royal family protocols, designed to prevent similar conflicts in the future and establish clearer guidelines for respectful interaction between family members. William's reaction to the peace agreement was cautiously optimistic. He was proud of Catherine for finding a way forward that maintained her dignity while opening the door to reconciliation. But he also made it clear that he would be watching carefully to ensure that the new understanding was honored in practice, not just in principle. The public's first glimpse of the new dynamic came during the annual Commonwealth Day service at Westminster Abbey. It was Catherine and Queen Camilla's first public appearance together since the hospital confrontation, and media attention was intense as observers looked for signs of ongoing tension or genuine reconciliation. The two women arrived separately, but acknowledged each other with warm smiles and a brief conversation before taking their designated seats. Their body language was notably relaxed compared to their previous strained interactions, and They were observed having what appeared to be a genuine conversation during less formal moments of the ceremony. But the real test came during the reception that followed the service, where representatives from Commonwealth nations gathered for informal discussions with royal family members. Catherine and Queen Camilla found themselves naturally working together as they moved through the crowd, each drawing on their own strengths to engage with different groups of guests. The collaboration was subtle but unmistakable, and it sent a clear message that the royal family had found a way past their very public difficulties. International guests, who had been briefed about the recent tensions, were relieved to see evidence of renewed harmony within the monarchy. Over the following months, Catherine and Queen Camilla developed what could best be described as a professional partnership built on mutual respect rather than personal warmth. They coordinated their charitable activities to avoid conflicts and occasionally collaborated on initiatives where their different strengths complemented each other effectively. The arrangement wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of tension as both women adjusted to new ways of interacting. But it was functional and dignified, allowing both to pursue their individual goals while maintaining the united front that the monarchy required for its continued effectiveness. William watched this evolution with satisfaction, recognizing that Catherine had achieved something remarkable in transforming a destructive conflict into a workable partnership. Her handling of the crisis had demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership qualities that would serve her well as a future queen, and it had established her as a force to be reckoned with in her own right. The broader impact on the royal family was profound and lasting. The crisis had forced a modernization of internal relationships that might have taken decades to achieve under normal circumstances. Younger members of the family now understood that they had both rights and responsibilities when it came to maintaining dignity and respect, while senior members learned that tradition alone was not sufficient justification for inappropriate behavior. Catherine's charitable work flourished in the aftermath of the crisis, partly because of increased public support, but also because she no longer had to navigate the complex politics of family disapproval. She accepted the international conference invitation that had triggered the initial escalation and delivered a keynote address that was widely praised for its substance and vision. The conference appearance marked a new phase in Catherine's royal career, one in which she felt empowered to pursue ambitious goals without constantly looking over her shoulder for signs of family opposition. Her confidence in public engagements increased noticeably, and her staff reported that she seemed more comfortable in her own skin than ever before. Queen Camilla, meanwhile, found that stepping back from attempts to control or diminish other family members actually enhanced her own position. Without the constant stress of managing perceived threats, she was able to focus more effectively on her own charitable interests and develop a more relaxed public persona that served her well in media coverage. The resolution of their conflict also had unexpected benefits for King Charles, who found that family harmony allowed him to focus more completely on his own royal duties without constantly managing internal drama. The monarchy's public image improved significantly as evidence mounted that the family had successfully worked through their differences while maintaining their commitment to public service. Perhaps most importantly, the crisis established new precedents for how conflicts within the royal family would be handled in the future. The old model of suffering in silence while maintaining public facades had been replaced by a more honest approach that acknowledged problems while working actively to resolve them. Catherine's role in this transformation was widely recognized both within the family and in public commentary. She had demonstrated that it was possible to stand up for oneself with dignity, to demand respect while offering it to others, and to turn destructive conflict into constructive change. As the first anniversary of the hospital confrontation approached, Catherine reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. The shy young woman who had once worried about overstepping boundaries had been replaced by a confident royal who understood both her own worth and her responsibilities to the institution she served. The experience had tested her marriage, her resilience, and her commitment to royal life in ways she had never anticipated. But it had also proved that she possessed the strength and wisdom necessary to navigate even the most challenging circumstances while maintaining her integrity and advancing her goals. Looking toward the future, Catherine felt optimistic about her role in the royal family and confident in her ability to handle whatever challenges might arise. She had learned that respect had to be earned and maintained through actions rather than simply granted based on position or tradition. Most importantly, she had proved to herself and others that she belonged in the royal family not just as William's wife, but as a valued member in her own right. The shocking palace moment that had begun as Queen Camilla's attempt to diminish Catherine had ultimately transformed into Catherine's emergence as a force for positive change within the monarchy. It was a transformation that would influence the royal family for generations to come, ensuring that future conflicts would be handled with the dignity and respect that the institution demanded and the public deserved.